Good afternoon, everyone. This is Margaret Red. Thank you for joining us. We're going to, because we have just over 900 registrants, and it'll take a minute for folk to be able to join the meeting, we're gonna hold off to start for another 90 seconds or so. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon again. I'm Margaret Red, the Executive Director for the National African American Insurance Association, or NAAIA. It's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome you as we sit together for the next 90 minutes for this conversation about race. Actually, for many of us on this call and around the nation, this moment represents so much more than a conversation. Rather, this is a pivotal point of a very long and significant journey. As the daughter of the segregated South, colored-only bathrooms, water fountains, restaurants, schools, etc., were the norm where I grew up. When I entered 7th grade, I was among a handful of students to integrate the local schools. I am the 6th of 13 children, the first to graduate from high school and college. And all the kids behind me graduated, by the way, so exposure is a huge thing to me. In May of 1977, on the campus of a small historically Black college, Jackson State University, I had the great fortune of connecting with an African-American recruiter from the St. Paul companies. 4 weeks later, 43 years ago, with college degree in hand, I accepted a job which quickly became a profession and a career. Over the course of that career, unlike so many, I've managed to achieve a measurable degree of success, and I've made my mark as the first several times over. However, there are many barriers nonetheless. As we initiate today's discussion, the things that drive many of us as African Americans include the opportunity to be at the table, to educate, to open up the dialogue and mindsets, and break down barriers to entry, all critical to legacy building and the effective address of racism, inequality, and injustice. Fact, people of color are underrepresented in the insurance industry. This is true at all levels, from CEO to staff and everything in between. So what we do in this moment is very important. When NAAIA issued the call for leaders to join us for this very important conversation, Bill Cunningham, CEO of IAT Insurance Group, Martin South, President and CEO of Marsh US and Canada, and Mark Toohey, Senior Vice President, Corporate Secretary, and Chief of Staff for the CEO, Liberty Mutual, all responded with a resounding yes. These leaders are not here because they have it all figured out. Rather, their presence is indicative of their support and their commitment to lead and be part of the body that defines and drives the solutions to problems of race and inequality that persists in our industry. Our discussion facilitator, Al Vivian, is President and CEO of Basic Diversity, a company based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Al was with us for part one of this conversation, and this afternoon he'll work with us again to link those discussions as appropriate and elevate the dialogue as needed. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Van Dunk, NAAIA Admin Manager, is going to step up and provide some brief housekeeping tips for us all. Once Jeff is done, please join me in welcoming to the platform Al Vivian and our distinguished industry leaders. Thank you.
As you all have joined on the webinar platform, you're in audio only, so you're muted. You can listen to your speakers or dial in using your telephone. You may enter questions in the Q&A box, as well as chatting through the chat panel. If you have technical problems, please type your issues into the chat panel and address it to panelists only, and one of our team will respond. If you have questions for the panel, please type your questions into the Q&A box, and the panelists will answer as many as possible towards the end in the Q&A section. This webinar will be recorded and posted on NAAIA.org, so you will be able to see content later. If you get disconnected, please try to be patient and reconnect, as we'd love to have you back. Again, if you have any questions, technical questions, please type them in the chat panel to the panelists only. Thank you.
And now we'll bring Al to the table. Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Margaret. So, a lot of things have led us up to this moment. Recent events, including the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. This resulted in months of protests, raised consciousness, and increased motivation for change across all races, both US and globally. Then topped off by the loss of 3 civil rights icons during 2020 in order of their deaths, Joseph Lowery, Dr. C.T. Vivian, and the incredible Congressman John Lewis. While these events have landed differently on different people around the globe, what is consistent are, 1, the unrelenting demands for systemic change and social justice, 2, the growing support for Black Lives Matter, and of course 3, the willingness of hundreds of thousands of protesters to literally put their lives on the line in support of change in the midst of a pandemic. So that's where we are. So with that backdrop, audience, it's been 2 months since the death of George Floyd and 1 month since we had our first webinar in this series. In this moment, what are the top 3 emotions that you're feeling right now? What are those emotions? From the list on the poll question that just popped up, click next to the 3 that are most impactful for you, the 3 that you're feeling the most right now.
Jeff, I'm seeing some feedback that some people are only able to select one choice instead of 3.
Let me put in 1.
I was able to select 3, so I'm not sure what that problem, what's driving that problem.
So Jeff, I'm not sure, but are these going to be populated? You're going to be able to give us an overview now, or is that going to come later?
It's going to be right now. About 80% have voted. Just giving it a couple seconds, and we're going to launch them right now.
That's what I thought. Thank you, ma'am.
And there seems to be a significant number of people who are only able to select one item.
All right, so what I'm seeing on here is frustration is the front runner. Looks like 36% said frustration, 25% said hopeful, and 17% said anger. Those were the top three. The interesting thing is those are the same top, well, it's slightly different. Those are the same top three as last time. It was last time back in June when we did this, and that was a much smaller audience than this one, but it was frustration was 31%, anger was 26%, and hopeful was 18%. So I'm seeing a massive similarity between then and now. The good thing is that not the anger, but the strength is still there. I'm seeing people still wanting to see some change, and that's a very good thing. I would always say that I'm glad that frustration is ranked higher than anger, but I'm glad that the anger is there because hopefully that motivates people to do something positive in this area. But it's good to see that the emotions have not changed a lot. So that's where we are as of right now. So this leads me to our first panel question. So for the panel, for Bill, Martin, and Mark, I want you to take about 2 minutes each to answer this question. The question is, how has the moment, this movement, impacted you personally? And you can answer in any order you want to.
Do you want me to start?
Sure, that'll be good, sir.
Sure. Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. I guess afternoon for many of you. I would say, first and foremost, it really caused me to look in the mirror and ask myself, am I doing enough? And I would say with it has brought an absolute lack of patience in terms of the need to drive real change. And as I talk to many friends and colleagues, Black colleagues and friends, it's opened my eyes and mind with the realization that I have no idea what you experience as a Black American. You know, the conversations around the fears you have as a parent of a Black child is nothing that I've ever had to experience in my life as the parent of white children. And I guess I'm absolutely sickened at the thought that if it weren't for cell phone technology, we wouldn't even be talking about George Floyd. So clearly we still have a long way to go in addressing inequality, systematic racism, and injustice. And as a white man, a CEO of IAT, I'm absolutely powerfully motivated, and I understand that I have the absolute responsibility to do everything I can to lead and drive real change, both within IAT and my community. And I think with that responsibility comes the need for all of us in leadership positions to show real courage. And I find myself much braver, engaging in conversations, both within my company and within my personal life, that perhaps in the past I would have avoided. And I'm much more aware, and I'm trying to do everything I can to educate myself by listening to people, reading, watching. And through this process of education, I find myself noticing subtle racism now much more quickly, and I don't let it go without addressing it, both personally and in my business world, regardless of how uncomfortable I might make someone feel. And so as I take a step back, I have great hope and optimism that this movement is going to be a real catalyst for change in this country. And I look forward to sharing more a bit later on the conversations we're having within my organization with our small community forums that we began several weeks ago right after the George Floyd murder. These conversations bring me great hope and optimism that we can continue to move forward our culture within IAT and become even more inclusive and diverse than we are today.
Very good. Thank you, Bill. Who would like to go next?
I'll jump in, Martin, if you don't mind. So I guess the overwhelming impact I'd have to cite is I feel fortunate that I'm surrounded by Black employees of Liberty to help me along this journey of understanding what they're feeling through all this. About a year before, early in 19, a group of us decided to. We've done a lot of work with diversity and inclusion within the company. And a lot of the very structured programs, the formation of ERGs goes back half a dozen years. There's been a lot of training, but there was an element that some of us felt was missing, and it was an interpersonal connection. And so about a dozen of us, about a year and a half ago, got together and committed to leave our position within the company at the door and just talk about how are the issues in the world affecting each of us differently. And so I do feel like I had a bit of a runway to gain insights, and we were fairly mature in those conversations when the George Floyd video came to light. A few weeks before that happened, we had been following the Ahmaud Arbery case, and then it was right around that same time that video came to light. And the stories that were shared within this group were heartfelt, very real and distinguished from how I experienced the world, which I think was really powerful. And you can't unhear or unfeel what was conveyed in those meetings, and it did change me. It changed my perception of the world. And we very quickly jumped to what can we do within the company to hear more in this time, because it was clear that there was tremendous pain emerging in our company, and there was really no organized outlet for it. And so we were able to very quickly move to action, and had actually a couple of meetings in a row just like this, where the first one I think we had, it was for our African American ERG. I think we had 2,800 people participate across the country, and then our CEO, David Long, hosted one where we had, I think it was 22,000 people participate. And it was a very unvarnished conversation that I felt was healing, but it was the beginning. And so we still are trying to lean into having a bias toward action and the things that we can do that I'm sure we'll talk about later in this conversation. But I'll leave it at that. Martin, hand off to you. And you're muted. There you go.
I'm sorry. You would have thought after all these months on Zoom, I'd be able to master that a bit more quickly. But anyway, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. And I'll tell you how this has affected me personally. I guess a very, very similar journey to everybody that we've heard from so far. My emotions have ranged, first of all, from kind of absolute shock, and quickly dissipating into anger that this can happen, and then it dissolved into a feeling of helplessness, really, about my lack of understanding, my inability to truly empathize with what had happened and with my colleagues here, and starting a real journey of being able to talk about race with my colleagues, about understanding where they were coming from. We had many sessions similar to this at work where I was able to hear it firsthand from individuals about how their race had affected their careers, how the microaggressions that they'd endured over many years had affected their confidence, and so on, and just too many individual stories to break down. And then slowly that helplessness really just grew a very strong resolve in me personally, and I think in our organization, that something has to change, and that it wasn't going to get done outside. There's, seemingly, such a divided world, and we're in this crazy COVID time at the moment where we're isolated and dealing with these things. And yet we're closer in some ways and more connected than we've ever been. And so, I've started to build up this amazing sort of sense of optimism about what can be. And there's one moment when we had a Zoom call and we were talking about this, and I saw the energy and the creativity burst out of the screen, and just imagined what that would be like, committed to action, and how that would be for everybody as they came to work to feel that they could be themselves. So in a strange way, despite, starting, in a pit of despair and anger and resolution, I feel now is the time. And, there's a poem by an English author called Rupert Brooke that's called Peace. And it starts with the words, "Now God be thanked who has matched us with his hour." And I kind of feel that at the moment. I feel it's that moment where we can seize the opportunity to start the very, very long road and the very diligent road of building methodically a more inclusive environment and a better industry as a result of that.
Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing that. What I want to touch on is something that all of you kind of talked about, is the fact that you had someone else you could talk to about these issues. I'm saying this to everybody on the call, that it's so important to have that around you. So I have a group of close friends that we meet once a month. We were meeting in person once a month and having breakfast together and talking about diversity. And we've been doing this for about 10 years now. And it's a diverse group of people, all pretty senior in what we do. And we've had some great dialogue. Now we're doing Zoom coffee breakfast meetings, but it goes a very long way. So question number 2 I have for you, panel, and this is a 2-part question. So the first part is, and I think you all kind of talked about this, well, you didn't specifically. Has your company issued an official external position statement? If yes, what related actions are being executed and or being considered in order to bring about meaningful change? That's part 1. I'll then come to part 2 after that. But the first part, have you done some kind of an external position statement? And if yes, what's being executed on that?
Want to stick to the same order?
Sure, that works.
Sure.
Yes, we made both internal and external announcements that IAT stands in solidarity with the movement and the need for significant change. And in addition to making financial contributions to a number of important organizations like NAAIA, within our walls, we came to the conclusion very quickly that we needed to begin having much more in-depth conversations around the issues. And so what I did right after the George Floyd murder is I had an all-employee Zoom call and just shared very openly my views on inequality, injustice, systematic racism, and the need for real change. And it was very clear, and I think, Mark, you mentioned earlier, just the pain and how folks were really having a really difficult time, not combination of obviously the horrible events, but also, being sheltered in place at home and cooped up with the pandemic. And so one of the things that we announced on that call very, very quickly was we want to create an environment, a safe environment for employees to come together, all employees, Black, brown, white, come together in small community forums, and let's have discussion and just share perspective with each other. A third of our employees signed up immediately. We've conducted dozens and dozens of these, and because what we wanted to do was limit it to 5 or 7 participants so that people really had an opportunity not only to listen, but to share. I've I've handled a half a dozen of these myself so far. I have more coming up over the next couple of weeks. We have 20 of my leaders that stepped up and wanted to help facilitate. I can tell you that these meetings have been very diverse, which I think has been very important for everybody to hear and try to understand. And think of Black IAT employees really putting themselves out there and being vulnerable, sharing their personal experiences, racism that they faced in their lives, their fears that they have as a Black parent, white employees listening and wanting to understand and learn to do everything they can to help make a stronger connection with their fellow employees and be better allies. And so I think what's come out of that is a couple of things, and not the least of which is we all need to educate ourselves. When I say we, I'm talking about white Americans, white employees of IAT need to do everything we can to educate ourselves. And I've asked my senior leadership team to join me. And we've got books that we're asking everybody to read. We've got documentaries we're asking folks to view. And really having conversations and participating in these small group discussions. And I can tell you that it's been eye-opening. You know, to me, employee engagement and the culture is everything. It's the heart of an organization. And creating an environment for folks to come and be open with each other and listen to each other. I left every one of those discussions learning something, opening my eyes and broadening my perspective, but also leaving it with just such great hope that there's so many people that are willing to share to help people understand, and so many people that want to learn and understand so they can help make a difference. Very encouraged by it.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Bill. You know, we have made a public statement basically condemning racism and declaring Liberty as an anti-racist organization. That was done by our CEO, primarily on LinkedIn. We didn't issue a press release. I think the other way that we got the message out, they're really intending to influence how Liberty was perceived and how we, our first bias toward action was to how we supported the community. So we have a program within Liberty called Torchbearers, where we provide matching contributions to different philanthropies for when employees make donations, we'll match. And we did open up a number of charities, including Black Lives Matter and the Equal Justice Initiative, to that type of matching grant, and that was very effective, I think, in positioning the company in terms of what we stood for and how we wanted to support the community. Recently, we just announced a gift to the Museum of African American History based in Boston, and a dialogue on race program that they're going to be assembling over the coming months to publicly talk about race issues in Boston and across the country. It was an organization born out of the abolitionist movement, so it has these roots that go way back, and we felt that type of support was a very effective way to take a stand. But I'll be honest, I think our most effective statements and positions have been those communicated to our employees in both supporting our Black employees and encouraging them to help share some of their experiences with their non-Black colleagues, and to encourage other Liberty employees to check in. These are difficult times for our Black employees, and to be an ally is to step in and make those relationships matter, and to make sure that they're okay, and to to the extent you can, try to build an understanding. It's going to be partial, but do the best you can to be understanding about how the news on the headlines every day affects different people differently, and let that guide your actions in how you deal with those colleagues, and frankly how you can then be an anti-racist yourself in your personal interactions, even outside of work. Bill, you mentioned that. So we tend not to be a company that are active on the PR front, but our most important audience is our current employees and future employees, and we think those vehicles I just described are the best way to get our statements out that we consider important.
Good, thank you, sir.
So, yeah, we too made an official statement very, very soon afterwards, talking about social justice, economic justice, and making a strong statement. We've done a lot of the same things that Bill and Mark have talked about in terms of opening up dialogue. Personally, I've reached out individually to numbers of colleagues to ask them to give me examples of where they've suffered racism, overt or covert. A group of great colleagues reached out to me and formed a group of people who will work with me as a team to help inform and shape. But most importantly, now we're really laying out a series of commitments to our organization that we're focused on, in terms of getting the balance of our organization right. So we've made a commitment to make 100% increase in African Americans and diversity at our leadership team. Every single one of the Marsh EC globally is going to be mentoring and sponsoring diverse people in a reverse way. Every single slate that we have now for MDs and other hires that we make, without exception, is going to be a diverse slate. So we think about that through our recruitment and promotion place everywhere through. We're making a commitment at our MD level, which is the most senior officer rank within Marsh, to make that a 40% diverse slate over the next few years, committing as much time to our resource groups and giving real consideration to how we recognize and reward the leaders of our employee resource group. These are individuals who, by any measure, are leading in an organization, but could be doing, not MD or senior roles, but in my opinion, are leading across the organization and having amazing impact and committing their valuable time and energy to something that is so important to us. And we want to make sure that those chairs and the people that are committed to those resource groups are rewarded. And importantly, to Mark's point about future employees, as we look at what we're trying to do when we recruit into our industry, that's one place where we can do that. And over the last couple of years, 80% of the graduates that we're bringing into the organization now are diverse, with a heavy skew to African American and Hispanic and background. So, overall, if we can make those commitments to being transparent about where we are, make sure that every single leader in the organization, when they're thinking about promotion, retention, is focused on some targets that we have to get to, we're going to measure and we'll be transparent about. And that there's a culture fundamentally where people, are safe to speak up, and where people will correct you when you go wrong. And, we are genuinely an anti-racist organization. It's a long road. A lot of the reading that I've been assigned by colleagues to do I keep turning the pages waiting for answers, and then you realize there are no answers. It's just, you have to be vigilant, you have to work hard, and if you're a white privileged man like I am, you just have to realize how, where you are, and make sure that you work at it every day. If you see something that looks to be racist in any way, then you speak up, and you don't allow it to go. These things can't be unsaid anymore. And so as you change the culture, as you measure it, as you hire people, as you retain people, as you promote them, over time, you make a real impact. And so that's the core of what we're doing right now.
Thank you, gentlemen. So now part B of that question. So part B is, what do you think may be the greatest obstacles to moving forward? Take about 3 minutes each on that. What do you think would be the biggest obstacles to moving forward in this area?
So I guess I'll start with inclusion and discussion and having very open dialogue, all of us becoming more comfortable being uncomfortable, to me is a big part of this. And to me, quite honestly, I see the biggest obstacle, what's happening on the national stage, the inability of our political leaders and media outlets to demonstrate their ability to listen to each other and together find ways to move forward, which is why we invest so much time from a leadership standpoint, why we're creating these small community forums to have the dialogue and to really create an environment and continue an environment where we're all listening to each other, not waiting for them to finish speaking so we can make our point, which is what you tend to see when you turn the news on when you go home. But really listening, and listening with your heart, listening through the eyes of the person who's talking, and try to put yourselves in their position and understand their perspective. And we're spending a lot of time talking about this and having these discussions. And so, and the reason is we, like all of you, we have many employees that go home, and what they see and what they, the example that's being set on the national stage certainly isn't one that we're trying to replicate within our operation, and feel a bigger responsibility to create that environment. And so I think that's what I would describe as the biggest external obstacle. I think in terms of moving forward and moving down the road of more inclusion, more diversity, we have to continue to have the difficult conversations with each other and hold each other accountable. I think it was Martin who talked about, having diverse candidate slates, not asking for them, demanding them, and not letting people fill positions until you're convinced they've got a diverse enough slate before you have them move forward. Holding people accountable. So I think it's more of an opportunity than a challenge, and we see it really having real impact, and having, as we have a training program. There is no excuse, as far as I'm concerned, for our entry-level training program not to be as diverse as the United States. If it's not, we are not hiring all of the best people. And that accountability in making sure that we're going to the right places, that we're recruiting in the right places, that we've got broad perspectives. We're not just looking for insurance degrees, because that tends to be a pretty low diverse major in colleges and universities. Broadening our thinking and having Black leaders at the table, driving the input in terms of what we're going to be doing, involved in the recruiting, helping drive change across the organization. So again, I think to me, the challenge is again, what people see outside, but I think the opportunity we have is just to have these very frank discussions and hold each other accountable, and not let anything get in the way in terms of an excuse where diversity comes into play. From an inclusion standpoint, zero tolerance for anyone that exhibits behaviors that would fly in the face of inclusion. Holding leaders accountable. The organizations not tolerate leaders that don't create an inclusive work environment. these are all obstacles if you don't deal with them. And the organization needs to see you address those issues very openly and very constructively. And again, holding people accountable at all levels of the organization. We've been doing this, and we've seen progress in all levels of our organization. So we're, again, we're gonna keep moving, and we're gonna keep having the difficult conversation.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I guess there's two sides to this question, I guess. Broad obstacles societally, and then obstacles to success internally. I'll start broadly, and basically, I think that the biggest obstacle is the siloed nature of our society right now, and I guess you could say separate or segregated, but it is true that, and I may be speaking more about the way Boston is than the rest of the country, but there's not a lot of broadly integrated communities, and so I think that people show up to this with their non-work experience, and then they come to, their workplace may be the most diverse experience that they have in their lives, and I think that is part of the problem, part of the obstacle, and I think that trying to come up with a way to have a dialogue on race societally, engage with others who experience the world very differently from you, is the best way to understand the world a little bit more fully. When I referenced earlier the group of folks, the discussion group, Al, similar to the one that you've had for a decade, but ours is relatively new. But I mean, I can remember hearing the stories about, a couple of the black guys in the group have kids that are getting ready to drive, and the lesson that they have to have that a lot of white kids don't have to have, and non-black folks don't have to have, and that's what do you do when you're stopped by a policeman. And I know from black friends that is a legitimate worry that they have. And I've got two daughters that I honestly that was not on my radar. And to hear those stories was one that kind of very humbling that I was that unaware and unappreciative of the difference in the experience that someone who I respect, wholeheartedly at work and view as a peer experiences the non-work world very differently. And I think the way to fix that, overcome that obstacle is, as I said, these dialogues, listening, understanding, recognizing that you're not the only one that's going, you're not experiencing the world the same way others are as a white person. And, internally, I think that it is a microcosm of society. We need to take proactive action and create opportunities for employees to hear from others, our black employees and their experience, and then through that conversation, through those relationships, it will change you. And I think it'll change your actions as a leader. It'll shape your view of what the right decision is, which is, it's not, everyone knows it's not a binary world. It's not, there are a lot of right decisions out there. And that type of awareness can inform right decisions. We've also provided a lot of D&I training, and I do think that that helps, but it's, you know, that it's a start. But I think that the dialogue and the relationships and in hearing the experiences of people who you respect that work the desk over from you, that are those things that you can put that training to work in that relationship. That'll be the things that will really help us overcome obstacles and move forward to a better place.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Well, the good thing about going last is a lot of those good ideas I can echo as well. So, but I'll take a different, slightly different tack. I mean, I think what I'm worried about right now is that we jump to optic-driven solutions, and that we do some things now, and then as things return to normal, whatever that is going to look like, you know, we just go back to old ways. I mean, this has to be a marathon. You know, if you're building a culture in an organization and a culture and rebuilding a culture in an industry which will not tolerate this, it's going to have to be a multi-year, a long-term effort, attracting people, creating the right environment where people show up and can speak their minds at meetings. You know, naturally, when you're going through promotions, it's just a given that there will be diverse slates on there, and that requires, you know, action and action and action over a long period of time, and you need to get it built in. And I think the concern that I have is that you know, this movement, this optimistic wave that we can do something different, withers on the vine. That's a real worry for me. And I think if we have to steel ourselves that this is at least a generational issue, not to correct it, but to just reinforce it. And so we can do that. And I worry, you know, this is a very competitive time at the moment. Margins are going to be under pressure from people. There's a lot of economic headwinds ahead of us. Corners will get cut, and we won't stay the course. And so, you know, we've got to build the DNA, and the process itself has to be part of the solution. How you think about it, how you drive things forward. And so that's my watch out, and it is against a very polarized country in a very polarized world at the moment, right now. So we're playing the role in many organizations that, you know, you would have hoped that governments would have been playing. That's not supposed to be a political statement. It's just the way things are in the world at the moment. And so that's my concern, that we don't treat this like a marathon. And in fact, even the marathon shouldn't have an end. This is a long-term commitment.
Very good. Thank you. So, you know, the thing about this situation that's been standing out for me, as you know, as we talk about these obstacles and the things that need to happen. First off, I love the fact that you all talked about, you know, long term. This can't be a short term thing. You talked about the relationships, having those relationships with people that are different, kind of keeps it fresh for you. For me, you know, 29 years doing this work, not to mention, you know, 59 years, 58 years as a Black man in America, but the things that have stood out to me about this moment that's different than the others. This is the first time I've seen major brands put their name on the line so quickly. I've never seen that before. The diversity of the protesters is also something that's kind of different. I've never seen that much diversity in those out there protesting. The expansive reach of it. I mean, we had a protest after George Floyd's murder. We had a protest in every state in the country at the same time about the same event. That's never happened before in any social justice related issue. And then it was also global. So kind of what I'm hearing in here, some of this is something that's important to me. So I was in a call recently a CEO of a Fortune 200 company that I happen to know calls me and he says, so Al, what should we be doing right now? And this kind of goes with what you are talking about, the long-term stuff, the relationships, making sure that it's built into the DNA of the DNA of the organization. He said, what should we as CEOs and major corporations, what should we be doing right now? And my response to him was that this is legacy building time. This is a time where people will always remember what you did or didn't do right now. And so I kind of told him, just as for 3 decades, we heard people talking about, you know, well, I marched with King back in the 60s and I did this and I did that. And, you know, my company did and XYZ. I kind of said, you know, this is that time. I think that for the next 3 decades, we'll hear CEOs and major influencers in society and major brands talk about, during the summer of 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, here's what I did. Here's what my organization did. Here's where we stood on that. I do believe that this time is somewhat different, that I've never seen things as expansive, as diverse, as big as brands putting their name on the line right away. And when I first started doing this, I started doing this in 91. I left my job in the Army and came on board doing this. And in 92, immediately thereafter, was the Rodney King event. And I heard America say, oh, we didn't realize these things were happening. We're gonna change. And I saw that last for less than a year. I'm hoping this one is different. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I do see this as a different time, but I'm also afraid that I'm gonna fall for the okie doke. So I'm hoping to see that change. And so it always pleases me when I see senior leaders in organizations and major brands throw themselves out there so quickly, because I've not seen that before. So thank you. So I have another question 3, and this is also for the panel. This is also a part A and part B question. So you've already answered, all 3 of you have already answered part of this. So part A is, have you had discussions within your organization with African-American employees regarding the current state of affairs? And you've kind of all said that. So I guess I'll ask this second part. You've kind of said this, but I want you to really either restate it or go a little deeper on it. What was the most significant takeaway from those discussions, the discussions you've had with African-Americans since this has happened? What have been the most significant takeaways from that? And I love the way you all keep going in the same order, which is easier for me to track as well. So thank you.
Great. So I'll jump in. So let me start by just responding to what you just said in terms of what's different this time. And I think that's why all of us have so much hope in terms of the ability to really drive some real change here. And we're having conversations within my company that we've never had before. To the level and to the degree of where we're going into it, I guess the concern I had was, geez, there's pushback. Are we really going to bring politics into the company? I said, we're not talking about politics. There's nothing political about racism or inequality or the need to be more inclusive and more diverse. We're going to talk about these issues and we're going to talk about them very openly. And so, and I guess going into it, I wasn't sure, what type of, what percentage would want to participate and what the degree of engagement would be at all demographics within IAT. And let me tell you, I was overwhelmed with the response, the desire to participate, and then obviously the one-on-ones are really important, to lean on people that have a different perspective than you do and do it privately and do it quietly, and just try to listen and understand. That was all really helpful. But to me, having Black, brown, and white employees, 5 to 7 people in a group, just being open with each other and wanting to share, wanting to understand. So I guess I was just really moved by how willing people were to put themselves out there, sharing their experiences, and want very much to be part of helping drive the change. White white employees being very open. You know, Mark, I think you said it earlier. Sometimes people go to work and it's the most diversity they have in their lives, but just being very open about, I have questions and I want to understand, can you help me? And being very open about sharing the fact that they have a ton to learn and want to learn and want to be helpful. And just the compassion and empathy that people showed for each other. And I'm hearing this from all of the facilitators in terms of how the conversations are going. I would just say from a humanitarian perspective, I'm so overwhelmed and hopeful about the dialogue, discussion, and what's coming out of it. The other thing that I would say is very nicely pointing out that as much as they're willing to share their experiences, pointing out that it's our responsibility as a non-Black person to educate ourselves. Do everything you can to, look, documentaries like 13th, reading books like White Fragility, just doing everything you can to try to understand and put yourself in that perspective. And so we took that to heart, and that was I would say every single one of my breakout groups, that was we said, what can we do? Educate yourselves. And so that was great feedback, and we're going to be driving that not only across my leadership group, but across the entire organization. And so I guess to me, what's come through loud and clear is not only is it okay to be having these conversations that maybe some of us or many of us didn't feel comfortable having in the past, it's necessary, and it's making a big difference. And it just goes such a long way for employees to seeing everybody willing to come together and just engage in the discussion and dialogue. And I think it's got to be, to your point, Martin, this can't be a one and done. These community forums, we're gonna continue to have these, and I think it's gonna continue to be a bigger and bigger part of our culture. We're gonna create these spaces to have these discussions on a host of different topics. So for me, it's been very moving, very, very eye-opening, and very encouraging.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think I'd like to go back to your comment as well. I'll answer the question as well, but in terms of how does this get legs and keep going forward? I think that one force I can think of for us is the diversity on our board that I think helps drive us forward. So it gives us sort of from the top a forward tilt in terms of increasing diversity within the organization and the value of that. I think hand in hand with that is, the way a company finds success today is through innovation. At the core of that is being open. And in order to do that, what you really need is a culture that where your employees can feel free to bring who they are to work every day and be free to share their points of view, their opinions, because embedded in that might be the difference maker, the next bit of competitive advantage that takes you into the future. But also embedded in that is they're going to show up with other things that will, allow that freedom of expression to show up, and that's their experience. How do they experience the world? And it becomes important to a company, I think, to both make the workplace a safe place for that kind of conversation to take place. And it's also about I guess what I'd see in many instances as the disparity between the environment you're trying to create inside your company for those reasons and what we see on the news. And so there's almost a need to reconcile those two scenarios, and I think dialogue is what gets you there. And so I just don't think that the conversation is going to peter out. I really don't. So to your question about what are the significant takeaways here from our meetings with employees, and I think that it's very easy to think about the company and its mission and your objectives and your competition and what you need to do to compete, and those being the taking primary status. But I think that some of the things about creating a culture that keeps fresh ideas coming in is just so foundational that that has to share center stage with a passion for those business objectives. I think the insights that we've gotten on how to build and maintain that environment have been the more significant takeaways. That they like our employees like the fact that we have a diverse board. They like the fact that we're talking about this and it's taken out of the shadows, and there's a freedom of expression, and that we're listening. I think that with that, though, comes expectations of action and impact. And I think that if I have concerns, is that while we are taking action and trying to move the ball forward, that it won't be fast enough, it won't be quick enough, and it won't be responsive enough to the feedback that we have. So it's a tangible takeaway, and that we have an understanding that we can now act on. But I think it's also a level of concern, maybe too strong, but we're paying attention to how fast can we move on these issues to be responsive enough.
Very good. Thank you, sir. So I think Martin.
Yeah, Al. So
and I'm gonna, after Martin, I'm gonna skip down to and open us up to Q&A, because I think the people are chomping at the bit to ask you their own questions. So go ahead, sir.
I'll try and be brief, because but my takeaways, going back to the question more specifically, was really have been very profound in a way. How different my path has been to a lot of my colleagues. Individual conversations with, right from very senior producers in our organization who, are very senior, make a lot of money, describing to me how they feel when they see a police car. It's the inverse of how I feel, like fear and anxiety when, I feel a sense of reassurance. And, the sense of, I've got many examples now from people that I wouldn't have been able to get to, but for the current stage, where microaggressions have been described to me, of colleagues writing to other colleagues to ask for help on things, and being told that they should figure it out on their own, when the exact same question is posed 2 weeks later by a white colleague to the same individuals. They get a 2-page explanation and coaching and mentoring response. I mean, just as you go on through all of these things, that, what sort of opened up to me is really how significantly different the world has been and how unjust it's been. And so the way to correct that culture where it's unacceptable and where we all stand up, for me, just the reality of what needs to be done and the length of time to do that just has left me with this sense of anxiety and concern. but real optimism, because also as I've had these conversations and you get to know your colleagues and you see the magic of who they are and what they should be bringing, can be bringing to the table, that they haven't, is there. So I vacillate from a sense of just disappointment and anger and optimism all the time from the conversations. They've been so interesting on many levels. And I think, to your point earlier, Al, that the time was never right in some ways for these conversations. It's so difficult for people to talk about. And as I did read, White Fragility, and as I read that, I was expecting more, this is what you've got to do. And it's not there. It's just, is a lifetime commitment. And the conversations to me, it just sort of helped dig the foundation of that deeper, if that makes sense.
Yes, makes a lot of sense. So I was going to skip immediately down to the Q&A, but there's a question I don't want to skip, and that's about the metrics, the transitional discussion of importance of metrics, accountability, and action. So during the call we did back in June, the participants talked about, we asked the participants, if you were able to pose a question to the CEOs or the senior leaders, if they gave you an audience, what are the things that you think they should know and do? And they gave 5 basic answers. The top 5 were: establish quantifiable measures and D&I goals, be transparent. In other words, share the numbers. Here's what we're doing so far, because we all know what gets measured is what gets done. Number 3 was hold leaders accountable and incentivize the results. Number 4, hire and promote qualified people of color. And number 5, demonstrate commitment. Walk the talk. Don't just say it, actually do it. So the thing that jumped out to me about all of that is how all of these were like clearly connected to action and metrics. I mean, they wanted specific data and they wanted to see that backed up. So my question on that is, 1, do you agree that those 5 things they mentioned are critical items? And part B of that, you can answer both of them together, is what else needs to be done besides just those things? Do you agree with those? And what do you think, what else should be done on top of that?
Same order, Al?
Same order, but I'm going to have you do them faster so we can get some Q&A.
I'll go quick. I guess short answer, yes. These are all the top important things to do. In fact, over the course of the last several years, we've been doing just that in terms of express, what's expected as a leader in terms of inclusion, diversity. What are our numbers? What are our goals? Are the numbers moving? Are the numbers changing? Are we making progress? And I would say across the board, we are making progress. We have, we've moved our diversity numbers, both in terms of the overall organization, as well as at all levels of our management team. But I think the important thing about sustainability, and I think Martin and Mark both talked about it, and to me, this is what's I would add to this, is the culture conversation, right? If the culture isn't an inclusive culture, and if everybody doesn't work in that environment and feel that the culture is the same, and you have the same opportunities, and they don't see promotions going equally to the demographics of the organization, and it doesn't feel like I can come and be myself and have the conversation, that I see people reaching out to me and wanting to mentor me and sponsor me, give me the feedback to help me manage my career, having those discussions with me. That's all so foundationally important to this, because short term, you can go on a recruiting blitz and change the numbers short term and make progress. But if it doesn't feel inclusive, it doesn't feel like I belong, people are going to leave you. The talent's going to leave and go find someplace else to work. So I think it's all of these things, but the only way you're going to really have the kind of impact is having the culture first, and having kind of conversations we're talking about. So I think culture would be the one big item I would add to this.
Good. Thank you, sir.
I can go very quick because I agree with what Bill just said. You know, I think that this is an effective list of how you move the ball forward. We have goals. We are holding people accountable. You know, the people that are being held accountable are tracking the numbers. We are trying to walk the talk and lead through action. And most of my comments on this call have been about that. And our talent acquisition folks are really very, very focused on hiring people of color. So I agree with that whole list, but you know, creating a pipeline into the company doesn't solve the problem alone. It really does come down to the culture that you create, or you won't retain that talent. And so I'd say over the last 10 years, we've been focusing on our culture. I mentioned that earlier, so I won't repeat myself, but that is the difference maker here for companies that move forward and make this a competitive advantage, and those that don't. And we're committed to being on the winning side of that.
Thank you, sir. And Martin.
Yeah, I would just, I'll be in danger of grave repetition. I think these are the right things to focus on in terms of the mission. The objective is, as everybody has said, is this place, a workplace where you can use for competitive advantage because people can show up and be themselves and to create, innovate, serve clients, be themselves in a way. And so the true north for me is creating that inclusivity. And I think you have to be very diligent about all of those steps. And making sure that you understand if you are able, and it's unforgivable not to be able to fill your pipeline with talent. It's when you're losing it, and understanding why you're losing it is the watch out for me. And that comes down to people that just do not feel they have possibility in your organization. So it is all about culture.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm now going to go down and open up for Q&A.
Well, thank you, Al. I'm going to help you through that.
Thank you.
And you know, believe it or not, we have about 58 questions in about 2 minutes. So, so of course, we won't get to all of the questions, but I would offer a couple of things. One, I think many of the questions have been answered over the course of the responses that we've gained from the panel this afternoon. So that's a plus. And then secondly, we may find ourselves begging this panel to come back for another round of discussions. If we all see fit after this, we can do a little assessment, but we'll do the best we can in terms of getting to a couple of some of the key questions. The first question I would offer is, what do you think is the corporate responsibility versus the government's responsibility to drive systemic change? Anyone want to jump on that one?
I'll have a go. Being an outsider, I don't want to wait for government. I mean, I think the time has passed all of that. You know, trust in society is at a record low in lots of dimensions. You know, you trust your likes, your social feeds, your family, your friends, and it has to be your place of work. As long as government is able to ensure that enshrined in law are protections and safeguards, and anything obvious that flies in the face of that is challenged, I think the focus has to be on what we can do at our place of work. We spend so much of our life in organizations that to not make that a mission for what you do at work, to make it a great place for your colleagues, you're on the wrong track. So I think to some degree, I worry about the things that we can impact, and I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about the things that really you can't impact.
Thank you.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, to me, I think the more you expect from the government to drive solutions, the more disappointed you end up being. If you look at the police reform as an example that is clearly going to come from all of the protesting, that was grassroots. That was people, raising their voice, and that's quite honestly forcing the local officials to do the right thing here and raise awareness, open the eyes, and the social media posts have helped that as well. So I agree. It's got to be grassroots. We control the environment together in terms of how we work, and creating that safe environment, and creating and not tolerating anything short of what you expect in terms of what that environment should be for everybody.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing on that. I think that with the police reform, I'm saying this to everybody on this call, until we push the police, what do you call them? The unions, until we push the police unions to change, nothing's going to change, because that's really what's stopping the change. It's more them than it is the police chiefs. It's more the police unions.
Thank you. Thank you, Al. Second question. First, there's a comment. There is a conversation trending on LinkedIn now by a chief diversity officer titled, "Why aren't there more Blacks in leadership roles in the insurance industry?" As 3 senior leaders within your companies, can you please offer your perspectives on this important topic? And what are your company actively doing to make headway? And I know most of you have already commented on this, so I would ask you if you have any additional comments you'd like to make.
I guess I would just talk about the need to be overt and action-oriented and inclusive in terms of who you train, how you train, who you develop, who you mentor, and being very conscious to make sure that you have an environment where everybody has that same opportunity, and the diverse candidate slates, both internally and externally, and forcing people to have diverse slates. We see it making significant impact. You need the candidates. The candidates are out there. They need to know about you. You need to find a way to have them part of your process, and you end up with much better people at the end.
I agree with that. I think that it's a pipeline question. I also think it's, I guess somewhat ironically, I think that this, the result of COVID and having people work remotely has actually increased the opportunity to create greater diversity in that the recruiting can be across the country, and people, we've proven, can be effective in their roles regardless of where they happen to sit day to day. And I think that's a change in our environment that will be a tailwind in building greater diversity and pipelines that land in our management ranks.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know a couple of you, Bill in particular, I believe you mentioned a couple of reading materials that you found very beneficial for you and your group. And I know I've been doing some reading lately too. And so what do you feel are some of the best documentaries and or readings to suggest to employees, whether they're leaders or your base?
And I would just echo some of the ones I thought 13th was incredibly moving and eye-opening, and I recommend it to everybody I talk to. And we're having, it's just, to me, that one was one in particular from a documentary standpoint. We've already mentioned White Fragility. I think Blind Spot is another good book. And there's another book that I would also recommend, because I think this helps provide insight in terms of certainly the younger generation, and that would be Coddling the American Mind. How good intentions but bad ideas are setting up an entire generation for failure. Those would be the ones I would mention.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me just ask another. How do I hold my leadership accountable? You've all talked about holding leadership accountable, agreed that that's an important piece. This question is coming from someone who's just basically saying, how do I do that?
Speak up. Speak up. Have the courage with your group, form a network and make your voice heard. I think that's there's no substitute for calling people out and for, you know, reach out to a safe group of people, get your points clear, and seek and demand an audience with your leadership. I think it's easy to do now. I think a lot of organizations are being much more open. This environment that we're in creates a lot of agility in terms of getting these things set up. And where you see injustice, if you see the slates that aren't there, call it out. That's how behaviors change. You know, I think one of the issues that have been is that there's been a silence and a defeatism that is completely understandable. But, you know, and don't be afraid of being accused of being a squeaky wheel or anything. We're beyond that right now. And so I think you have to call it. And it is, you know, it's a phenomenon in lots of ways in business at the moment. It's easy to be passive aggressive in lots of ways. If you don't agree with something, you remain silent and opt off. This is not a time for that. It has to be overt and clear and constructive. And so we also have to make that environment that if you hear of repercussions against that, that has to be treated with, you know, a deliberate and immediate, you know, discipline. It cannot be acceptable.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. What resources would you recommend or consultant organizations have you found to be effective in developing your leaders to recognize microaggressions in the workplace?
Mark's turn.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with, I don't know how unique it is among companies of our size, but you know, we've had an organization called Visions that's actually provide diversity coaching to some of our senior leaders to help us to see things, to prime the pump of awareness, so to speak. And it's been very effective in our path. And you know, we have had Allison Manswell come in and do a number of training sessions for us. We started off with this was several years ago at this point, a program on unconscious bias, which is sort of the first stepping stone on this path that we've been on. But all of those collectively and the concepts covered have been integrated into our leadership development programs, have been an important part of our journey.
Thank you. This is a question around pushback. I know we've spent a lot of time, you all have been great talking about some of the really positive things that you're doing, but we all know this is not a perfect world. So this question I think is good. It's how are the various companies handling the inevitable naysaying that is bound to bubble up from some in the organization who are not on the team, who are not receptive to these conversations?
Yeah, I think it's my turn now. I guess a couple of things. I would say I sense and hear much less and less pushback from anyone in my organization than perhaps I would have in the past. And I think it speaks to the movement and how unless you live under a rock or just see the world as a cube, I don't know how you can't possibly see the need for real change. And so I think I have not overtly sensed pushback. Every now and then you'll get the question, and how you answer that question, I think is really important. And to me, I don't mean this self-aggrandizing. I just think it's really got to start at the top. If you have the position of CEO, you set the tone in terms of what's expected and what's tolerated and what's not tolerated. And we have the obligation of getting our direct leadership team there, both hearts and minds. It's then up to them to get their leadership team hearts and minds. and having very open conversations. You know, as an example, we do all employee calls every quarter, and I open it up for questions, anonymous questions, and we get some pretty direct, hard-charging questions on topics like this. I think the organization, seeing the comfort in addressing those questions, and how senior leadership feels about it, I think that's the best way to at least stifle the naysayers. I'm not naive. I mean, we're a melting pot of the U.S. in our company as well, and I'm sure there's people that are, you know, not as engaged or maybe listening with their arms crossed and maybe, you know, see things a little differently. All I can do is hope I get to those folks and reach to those folks, and that all of us can reach and make some change in that perspective. But ultimately, they just need to see the absolute unwavering direction in terms of where you're going, that unless you get on the train, you're going to get run over. And that's the best way I can articulate it.
So Margaret, I have one I want to throw out that somebody typed in, and that is, we're talking about the conversations taking place within organizations. Somebody said the bigger question is whether the major brands will commit to this level of conversation quarterly for the next 2 years, or for however long it will take for the change to really hit the heart of America. So what do you think on that, gentlemen?
Well, sorry, you saying for only 2 years, Al?
It says for 2 years or however long it will take to change the heart of America. In other words, they're saying that this conversation is great that we're having right now in the heat of what's going on out there, but will these major brands commit to doing that for as long as it takes? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that is the biggest concern that I have right now, is that people try to put this in a time box and to try and use optics and knee-jerk reactions to deal with these issues. I can make all the commitments that I like, that we will commit to this till it's done, but we have to create that culture to do that. So it's easy to say yes, but those are just words. I think it's more than 2 years. This is a long journey to get for us to mirror the communities that we live in, with people at every level and with a different culture. This is not a quick fix.
Concur. I guess what they're asking is, would you all be willing to commit to doing a quarterly, you know, the discussions you're having internally within your organization, the small group, commit to doing that quarterly for 2 years and beyond?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
And it's you know, the probability is way over in the beyond end of that time spectrum. I mean, I agree with Martin. This isn't a 2-year thing. This is about evolving our culture, and who knows what we're going to experience in the next 24, 36, 60 months. It's about resiliency. It's about culture change. It's about diversity. It's never ending.
Of course, you know, I concur. I got 29 years in on this, and I know that a lot of the things have not changed at all. So I'm assuming that's the same thing the person who typed in that question was considering, that, hey, this has been going on forever. Will organizations commit?
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm loving your answers. Thank you, gentlemen.
And then thank you, Al, for giving us that actually what happens to be our final question. We are just shy of 60 seconds before we hit the half-hour mark in terms of the end of the call. Just want to take this opportunity to truly thank you, each of you, Bill, Martin, Mark, for your time this afternoon, and Al, certainly you as a leader and a facilitator. We could not have done this without you, and we certainly appreciate everyone on this call. I want to end this with an ask from NAAIA. And as I look at the next couple of slides that actually display the ask, it's really heartwarming that most of the things that we're asking, this group of leaders is already agreeing to. So it's really a matter of moving forward and executing. So from the CEO perspective, we're asking you to be role models, not just you on the panel, but any and every CEO and leader that's on this call. identify, manage, and support DE&I. Be an advocate, challenge the status quo. Hold your organizations and your leaders accountable for actions and results. And then for the companies, NAAIA's ask is commit to a partnership which delivers value and drives measurable change for DE&I. Be transparent, share the numbers. We all know the numbers aren't great in most cases, but we also know that without a baseline, we have nothing to measure. So we are asking for transparency. Set measurable goals, and again, hold your leaders accountable. We are in this together, all of us. We have the opportunity to move the dial and make meaningful change. And we can be the change that we know is so critical to our business today and over the long haul. Now is the time, let's get to work. Thank you everyone for your attention and your time. And we hope to see you back here again with this group in the not too distant future. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Margaret, we could have not made any of this happen without you, Jetha, and your wonderful team. So thank you all as well.
Thank you.